Recently, another Korean movie deeply shocked me. This film is known as the most paradoxical work of dark director Park Chan-wook, and because of its extreme content and manic tone, it was banned in several countries when it was first released in 2009. Yet despite that, its unique place in world cinema has never been shaken, so tag your friends and watch it together. In a monastery somewhere in Korea, there is a young priest named Sang-hyun. He was orphaned as a child and adopted by a blind priest. To this day, he has been working in that monastery for more than 10 years. During this time, he has witnessed many dying patients confess their sins and has bid them farewell in the name of God. But as he heard more confessions from the dying, Sang-hyun's doubts grew heavier, and he often asked himself, if God truly exists, why do so many people suffer? To prevent more people from dying of illness, Sang-hyun made a bold decision. He planned to travel alone to a virus research institute in India to take part in a secret medical experiment. If it succeeded, he could save more lives. But if it failed, he would die in a foreign land, sacrificing himself for faith. When Sang-hyun arrived, the staff injected him with the bacillus virus, then followed it with a vaccine. From that moment, his life became a torment worse than death. At first, nothing happened after the injection, but a month later, his body was covered with painful sores, and his fingernails began to fall off one after another. To ease the pain, he played his flute, but suddenly, a mouthful of blood burst from his lips, and blood streamed down from his nose. Seeing the danger, doctors hurried to give him a blood transfusion, but even after all their efforts, they still couldn't save Sang-hyun's life. Just as the doctor declared him dead, Sang-hyun's body suddenly moved, and miraculously, he came back to life. The news shocked everyone. Not only was he the only survivor among 500 volunteers, but because of this rare resurrection, believers began to see him as the chosen one. However, since surviving, Sang-hyun's body had changed in strange ways. His wounds healed unusually fast, and his senses of sound and smell became unnaturally sharp, often making him dizzy and nauseous, as if he had eaten raw meat. One day, a woman came to ask Sang-hyun to pray for a man suffering from a terminal illness. When he arrived, he was surprised to see that the patient was his old high school classmate, Kang-woo. Kang-woo's mother was thrilled, believing that with Sang-hyun's prayer, her son might finally be cured. That evening, she invited Sang-hyun to dinner at their home, but the moment Sang-hyun stepped through the door, he caught the scent of blood coming from Kang-woo's wife. While the mother wondered what it was, Tae-ju suddenly felt warmth spreading in her abdomen, and she rushed to the bathroom, realizing she had just started her period. When she came out, more guests had arrived. They played mahjong and gossiped, while Tae-ju, still weak, served everyone like a servant. Even worse, her simple-minded husband often treated her roughly, and even when she fell, she had to endure it in silence. Tae-ju didn't want to live like this, but she couldn't fight back after all. Without this family's adoption, she would have died on the streets 10 years ago. As night fell, Sang-hyun was suddenly awakened by strange, indescribable sounds. He grew anxious, grabbed his flute, and struck his thigh to distract himself. But the harder he hit, the louder the sounds became. He went to the bathroom to wash his face, but his hearing had become terrifyingly sharp, amplifying everything by hundreds of times: the broom sweeping in the hallway, the laughter downstairs, the sound of chopping vegetables, a cat's meow, even the faint movement of mites in his pores. All these noises echoed endlessly in his ears, until he couldn't stand it and fainted. When morning came, the sunlight brought him some relief, but as soon as it touched his skin, white smoke rose from his body, burning him awake in an instant. Terrified by this strange reaction, Sang-hyun hid inside a wardrobe and only dared to come out at night. But soon, his body broke out again in sores, as if reacting to something unknown. Still, he had prayers to perform, so he wrapped his body tightly in white bandages and went to the hospital to fulfill his duty. The woman he prayed for was in a car accident, covered in blood and barely alive. Yet as he looked at the fresh blood pulsing from her neck, Sang-hyun felt an uncontrollable urge. He tried to suppress it, but the more he resisted, the stronger the desire grew. During the prayer, he deliberately touched a bit of the woman's blood and, while no one was watching, secretly tasted it. From that moment on, after tasting fresh blood, a hidden craving awakened within him. Later that night, he went into another patient's room, removed the foreline, and drank deeply. After he was satisfied, his body changed again, the sores quickly disappeared, and his skin became smooth and pale. Looking at his reflection in the mirror, Sang-hyun began to suspect that the virus and vaccine had caused a genetic mutation. To test his theory, he opened the window and leapt from a tall building, but he didn't die. The wounds healed within seconds. It was then that Sang-hyun realized, from this moment on, he was no longer a man of faith, but a creature that defied God of Empire. As this new reality sank in, his mind filled with confusion, and he wandered aimlessly through the night. At a street corner, he saw Tae-ju standing there, lightly dressed against the cold. She often came out at night to escape her family's cruelty, but Sang-hyun's appearance brought a change to her lonely life. Feeling pity for her, Sang-hyun walked up behind her, took off his shoes, and gently placed Tae-ju's feet inside them. It was a small gesture, yet it filled her with unexpected warmth. Perhaps out of compassion, Sang-hyun restrained his thirst for blood in front of Tae-ju and instead turned his hunger toward another person, the blind priest who had raised him. The priest was astonished by Sang-hyun's condition. If his body could heal so quickly, then perhaps his own blindness could be cured as well. But Sang-hyun was torn, because as a priest he was meant to save lives, not harm them, and he could not bear the thought of living off human blood. Becoming a vampire was never his choice, but if he stopped drinking blood, unbearable pain would consume him, leaving him trapped between human and monster. But unlike Sang-hyun's hesitation, the priest was the complete opposite. In order to see the light again, he didn't hesitate to slice open his wrist, letting his own blood nourish Sang-hyun's life. After that night's encounter with Sang-hyun, something inside Tae-ju also began to change. For the first time, she felt warmth, and she no longer wanted to endure her foolish husband's humiliation, nor live like a despised creature. So she secretly went to meet Sang-hyun behind her mother-in-law's back. Sang-hyun seemed to have expected her arrival. He chose a room that no one knew about, knelt before Tae-ju, and like a god, comforted her weary body and wounded soul. But as emotions deepened, he turned into a creature overtaken by desire, and shared an intimate moment with her. 3 minutes later, Sang-hyun handed Tae-ju a bottle of water, and for the first time in a long while, she smiled. That brief encounter with Sang-hyun made her rediscover the meaning of life, and she hoped to meet him again in daylight. But Sang-hyun was no longer the man he once was. He was a vampire, and daylight was his greatest torment. After some hesitation, Sang-hyun decided to show Tae-ju his true nature in a special way. Terrified, Tae-ju ran back home and hid in a corner, trembling uncontrollably. But the next moment, Sang-hyun suddenly leaped in through the window. As Tae-ju froze in fear, Sang-hyun covered her mouth and tried patiently to explain everything. Yet Tae-ju was far too frightened to listen. Instead, she rushed toward the door, desperate to escape.
내가 뱀파이어인 게 뭐가 중요해요? 태주 씨, 내가 신부라서 날 좋아했어요? 나랑 같이 가요. 내가 이 지옥에서 데리고 나가줄게요.
Just as Sang-hyun tried to take her and flee through the window, he accidentally broke the toilet, and the noise drew the attention of her mother-in-law. Left with no choice, Sang-hyun escaped first, giving Tae-ju some time to think whether to seize her freedom or continue living a miserable life. And undeniably, after being with Sang-hyun, Tae-ju not only felt warmth but also tasted freedom for the first time. So even after learning that Sang-hyun was a vampire, she still sought him out one late night. When she saw him drink blood and watched the sores on his face vanish before her eyes, Tae-ju was both shocked and fascinated. In that moment of awe, a daring thought began to form in her mind. Together, they were like two birds freed from their cages, soaring through the night. But once they returned to reality, they had to face a cruel truth. Sang-hyun saw bruises on Tae-ju's body, left by Kang-woo's abuse. Unable to bear her pain any longer, Sang-hyun wanted to kill Kang-woo and free her from suffering. Yet as a priest, He knew such a thought was wrong. To kill out of love was a sin against his faith, leaving him torn between devotion and desire. Lost and desperate, he turned to his adoptive father, the blind priest, for guidance, but the old man said something unexpected.
죽기 전에 한 번이라도 바다의 일출을 볼 수 있다면.
지금 무슨 생각을 하시는 거예요? 뱀파이어나 햇빛을 볼 수가 없어요.
불나방 한 마리라도 보고 싶어요. 뱀파이어면 어때? 장님 눈 떼어주는 게 기적이 아니고 뭐냐?
It became clear that the blind priest cared little for Sang-hyun's inner struggle. What he wanted was Sang-hyun's blood, believing it could restore his own sight. Hearing this, Sang-hyun's faith shattered completely. He never imagined that the man he had respected all his life was nothing more than a selfish, greedy soul. As Sang-hyun turned to leave, the blind priest staggered after him, still begging for blood. At that moment, Sang-hyun's belief in God collapsed entirely. He no longer trusted the divine, and finally tore away his mask of holiness. He found Tae-ju again and, while Kang-woo was asleep, spoke quietly with her. When he saw the fresh wounds on her legs, a dangerous thought crept into his mind. Before sunrise, Sang-hyun took Kang-woo out to sea, pretending they were going fishing, and when the time came, he covered his mouth and nose, pulling him into the water. Only when Kang-woo stopped moving did Sang-hyun rise back to the surface. To avoid suspicion, they staged the scene to look like an accident caused by a capsized boat. From that moment, the fool Kang-woo was dead, and Tae-ju finally gained her freedom. But after taking a life, Sang-hyun's soul was filled with unbearable guilt, and his body erupted once again with painful sores. Only then did he begin to pray to the God he had once abandoned, begging for forgiveness. Later, he went back to his blind foster father, asking him to read the scriptures for him, but the priest replied, saying he would only do so if Sang-hyun offered his blood in return.
사제경을 해주시면 드리죠.
인자하신 하나님 아버지, 성자의 죽음과 부활로 세상을 구원하시고 죄를 용서하시려고 성령을 보내주셨습니다.
Under the influence of the scriptures, Sang-hyun began bleeding from his eyes, ears, and nose. Writhing in unbearable pain, his foster father reached out, touched the blood, and lifted his hand toward his mouth to taste it. But before he could, Sang-hyun stopped him, pulled a bottle opener from his pocket, and drove it deep into the old man's heart. Then he threw himself forward, drinking his foster father's blood until every last drop was gone. Only when the blood was drained did the sores on Sang-hyun's body finally disappear. From that moment on, Sang-hyun had completely become a vampire. He no longer believed in God, nor was he bound by faith or emotion. His only attachment now was Tae-ju. After Kang-woo's accidental death, his mother couldn't bear the pain of losing her son and fell into a vegetative state. From then on, Sang-hyun and Tae-ju began to live without restraint. They cared for the mother during the day and indulged in their passion at night. But one evening, while they were lying together whispering their feelings, Tae-ju accidentally let slip a secret she had never told anyone. The moment Sang-hyun heard it,
근데 상현 씨가 대장이야? 이래라 저래라 막 때리고. 오빠는 나한테 손 한 번 안 댔는데.
his face turned grim. If Kang-woo had never beaten Tae-ju, then where did those wounds on her body come from? The answer was clear: they were self-inflicted. She had done it all to gain Sang-hyun's sympathy and to use him as a weapon to kill Kang-woo, all for the sake of her own freedom. Realizing this, Sang-hyun completely broke down. He had struggled so hard to control his thirst for blood, trying to remain human, yet because of Tae-ju's lies, he had committed an unforgivable sin. He felt ashamed of his faith and disgusted with himself, and in a fit of rage, he grabbed Tae-ju by the throat. Overcome with emotion, he used too much force, and Tae-ju coughed up blood, nearly dying in his hands. Seeing her on the verge of death, Sang-hyun was struck with pity once again. Though he was no longer a priest, a trace of his divine compassion still lingered within him. He could not change who he was, leaving him torn between two natures, half man, half vampire. Unable to watch her die, he bit his own tongue and pressed his lips to hers, sharing his blood with her. With Sang-hyun's blood flowing through her, Tae-ju revived, but she, too, became a vampire. Unlike Sang-hyun, Tae-ju had no faith and had long been broken by years of humiliation and pain. So once she transformed, she released all the darkness inside her. She fed on human blood, used her beauty as bait, and any passerby could become her next victim. Sang-hyun saw everything, and it tore him apart. He couldn't stand to watch innocent people die at her hands and tried to stop her. But Tae-ju asked coldly, "If we stop killing, then what are we supposed to eat?"
내가 도와주면 사람들이 아무래도 좀 편하게 죽음을 맞이하는 것 같아.
스승이 내주면 그게 무슨 맛이야? 이게 더 맛있어.
To prevent more deaths, Sang-hyun hid in the shadows, waiting for the moment she would act, then grabbed her by the leg and dragged her back home. After that, Tae-ju refused to eat or drink anything. Even when Sang-hyun brought her chilled human blood, she took only a sip before vomiting it all out. Sang-hyun was torn. He knew that getting into her hunger meant another innocent death. Yet seeing her covered in sores again, he couldn't bear it. After much struggle, he finally decided to deceive a doctor, claiming that Tae-ju was ill, and lured him to the house. Soon after, relatives came to visit again. Sang-hyun and Tae-ju disguised themselves as normal people, sitting around the table playing mahjong, chatting and laughing. But even in her vegetative state, the mother retained a faint consciousness. When a relative tried to feed her, she used her only movable finger to reveal the truth about Sang-hyun and Tae-ju. That moment sealed the relative's fate. A sinister smile crept across Tae-ju's face, and Sang-hyun, unable to stop her, walked out of the room and quietly closed the door. Sensing danger, the relatives tried to flee, but Tae-ju blocked their path. In a frenzy, she drained the blood of more than 10 family members until the room was silent. Having killed too many, Tae-ju left a trail that the police would soon follow, and Sang-hyun knew they didn't have much time. To avoid further trouble, he quickly gathered Tae-ju and Kangwoo's mother and fled the house. But as they passed by a church, Sang-hyun suddenly stopped the car and silently walked toward the believers standing outside. As the air filled with frantic screams, the believers were startled awake, and when they turned toward the source of the noise, they saw Sang-hyun mistreating a woman. In that instant, their faith completely collapsed. They could not believe that the priest they had revered for so long was nothing more than a corrupted sinner. Sang-hyun didn't resist or try to explain. He simply staggered to his feet and walked away. He did this not out of lust, but as a form of redemption, to make the believers understand that behind the facade of holiness, even faith hides its share of corruption and sin. Yet such redemption was cruel and agonizing for Sang-hyun, who had already taken the lives of many innocents. Afterward, he drove Tae-ju to a seaside cliff and threw the car keys into the endless ocean. Sensing something was wrong, Tae-ju stepped out to look, but all she saw were crashing waves below. Panicking, she emptied the trunk and pulled Sang-hyun inside with her, closing the lid behind them. Realizing there was no escape, she crawled under the car for cover, but Sang-hyun pushed the vehicle forward. He knew he had hurt too many innocent souls and no longer deserved God's mercy. He didn't want to go on living in pain and contradiction, nor did he want Tae-ju to keep harming others. So he made his final decision to end both their lives together. Witnessing Sang-hyun's resolve, Tae-ju finally understood that perhaps death was the only peace left for them. She approached him, taking something from her bag. It was the pair of shoes Sang-hyun had once given her, the only warmth she had ever felt in this cold and merciless world. In their final moments, they sat side by side, quietly expressing their feelings for each other. As the sun rose over the horizon, a searing pain spread through their bodies. They clung to each other tightly, and under the burning rays, their bodies turned to ash and vanished into the wind. This film uses the theme of vampiric transformation to explore the conflict between human desire and morality. Sang-hyun becomes a vampire through a medical experiment, a man once holy and selfless, now consumed by temptation. But what makes the movie truly haunting is not the blood or horror, it is the revelation that even the most sacred beings can lose themselves amid loneliness, passion, and guilt. The ending's destruction is not merely punishment, it is a sorrowful reflection on human nature, the desire for redemption forever trapped within the darkness of our own making, where escape can only come through a painful end. Alright, That's the story for today. See you in the next one.